which I find interesting, and that is that we all know that if Tisha B'Av will come out on Shabbos Kodesh, then we fast on Yom Rishon, right? We don't fast on Shabbos. We fast on Sunday. How about if a bocher became a bar mitzvah on Sunday? So when Tisha B'Av came, he was technically a katan. Not technically, he was a katan. It was not bar mitzvah until Yud B'Av. So now it's Yud B'Av. So does this child have to fast? The question is that if the fast of Tisha B'Av on Yom Rishon is a tashlumin, is a payment for not being able to fast on Tes B'Av, so what can we say about this child on Tes B'Av wasn't obligated to fast? Is he obligated to fast now when it's Yud B'Av? Now, many people have a minhag to fast before their bar mitzvah anyhow, but in terms of the din, is a person obligated to fast on, this boy, is he obligated to fast on that Sunday, Yud B'Av, since he was a katan on Tisha B'Av? If he was born on Tisha B'Av itself, so that means that on Tes B'Av, of course he has to fast on Yud B'Av, because everyone who's living on Tes B'Av, who's chayiv on Tes B'Av, can't fast on Tes B'Av, so they fast on Yud B'Av. But if he wasn't chayiv to fast on Tes B'Av, and Yud B'Av is only a tashlumin, a payment back for not being able to fast on Shabbos, what would you say the din is? Interesting question. Now, there is a Gemara in Tainus, and the Gemara in Tainus says there's machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and the Chachamim. Rabbi Yochanan says that if I would have been around at the time of Churban Abayis, I would have fasted on Yud B'Av. Why? Because Rubai Shalhecho, most of the Beis Hamikdash was burnt on Yud B'Av. Certainly by Bayis Rishon. By Bayis Sheni, we'll see is a question. But by Bayis Rishon, most of the Beis Hamikdash was burnt on Yud B'Av. The actual fire started late Tisha B'Av in the afternoon, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan said, I would have made the fast day on Yud B'Av, not Tes B'Av. The Chachamim said back, Rubai Shalhecho, even though Rubai Shalhecho was Nisraf on Yud B'Av, but Aschalta the Pranusa Adifa, the beginning of a tzara, of a terrible thing, is more important. And therefore, even though the actual burning of the Beis Hamikdash took place mostly on Yud B'Av, on Tes B'Av was the start, and that's the most important. This concept, by the way, is probably the reason for a unique shita that of the Avudraham, that the Beis Yosef brings in Siman Tov Kuf Nun, that were Asar B'Tevis to fall out on Shabbos, we would fast on Shabbos as well. Right now, Asar B'Tevis can't fall out on our calendar on Shabbos. It does fall out on Friday, and we fast on Friday. But if it can't fall out on Shabbos, but Abu Draham says if it will fall out on Shabbos, we would fast on Shabbos too. Rashi and Megillah Daf Hey says we would not. The Rambam in Perek Hey of Tanya says we would not, but Abu Draham holds that we would. Because by Asar B'Teves, which was when they circled the city, near the pasuk by the Navi says, Be'etzem hayom hazeh. So Abu Draham says, just like it says, Be'etzem hayom hazeh by Yom Kippur, it says, Be'etzem hayom hazeh by, in the Navi, Yecheskel says it by Asar B'Teves, and therefore, Asar B'Teves, you would fast on a Shabbos too. We don't pasuk in this way, it's not the Gela Maisa, but Beis Yosef does bring the Shita. My understanding of the Abu Draham's Shita would be that it has to do with that in terms of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Asar B'Teves was the Aschalta, the Pranusa, was the beginning of this tragedy. It's an interesting thing. Rameir Simcha says, or Sameach writes, that the reason why there's one fast that a person can do on Shabbos, and that's the fast of Tainis Chaloim. If a person has a bad dream, he can fast on Shabbos, and then he has to make up for not eating on Shabbos by fasting on Yom Rishon, on Sunday. So Rameir Simcha says that how come a Tainis Chalom could be on Shabbos, or how could Abu Draham hold that there could be a fast day on Shabbos for Asar B'Tevis, if for Tisha B'Av you don't fast on Shabbos, and Tisha B'Av is more chomer than Asar B'Tevis, right? So how could it be that Asar B'Tevis you would fast on Shabbos according to Abu Draham and Tisha B'Av not? Tainis Chaloim yes, and Tisha B'Av not? What's going on over here? So the Ar Sameach says, the Mabit in Kiryas Sefer says that to fast on a Shabbos is only an Isser min HaTorah if you fast the entire Shabbos. But if you eat Friday night and fast Shabbos by day, that's not an Isser Torah because you ate on Shabbos. So therefore the Ar Sameach says that it's not such a wonder how the Abu Draham could say fast Asar B'Tevis on Shabbos and Tisha B'Av you don't, fast Tainis Chaloim on Shabbos and Tisha B'Av you don't, but because Tisha B'Av is a night and day fast, which starts by Shkia, if you have to fast Tisha B'Av on Shabbos, you would violate the din of the Torah of fasting on Shabbos, because then you would be fasting the entire Shabbos. Whereas a Tainis Chalom, you would only do Shabbos by day. Asar B'Tevis, you'd only do Shabbos by day. You would have a Suda Leil Shabbos, and therefore you wouldn't be violating the D'Oraisa of fasting on Shabbos. So the Abu Draham doesn't really hold that Asar B'Tevis is more chamor than Tisha B'Av. Even though Tisha B'Av we don't fast on Shabbos, and Asar B'Tevis according to Abu Draham we would, the reason is because Tisha B'Av is, because it's so chamor, is a night and day fast. And that you can't do on a Shabbos, because then you would be over the D'Oraisa of fasting on the whole Shabbos. Whereas by fasting on Asar B'Tevis by day or Tainus Chalayim by day would not be a violation, right? Now let's go. So we shouldn't think that a Asur B'Tevis is more Chomer than Tisha B'Av, according to Abu Draham, or Tainus Chalayim. But it's because Tisha B'Av is a night and day fast that you can't have it on Shabbos, because that's a violation of the Torah to fast the entire Shabbos. That's how the Ar Sameach wants to position it. Now, the question when Tisha B'Av, and this is Nageya, Halacha, and I think it's the difference between Ashkenazim and Sfardim, there is a Tshuvas Rashba and some Rishonim that say that when Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos and you actually fast on Yom Rishon, on Sunday, right? The Rashba says, once you're fasting on Sunday because you can't fast on Shabbos, then you can say that the reason why you're fasting is because Lamaisa, most of the Beis Hamikdash did burn on Yud B'Av. The inference of this tshuva would indicate that perhaps when a person fasts on Yud B'Av, because Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, that in actuality, you're now fasting not for Tisha B'Av, but for Yud B'Av. Because even though the reason why they made the fast on Tisha B'Av is because the beginning of the tragedy is the worst, but it could recognize that once you're not fasting on Tisha B'Av because of Tisha B'Av, because it's Shabbos and you're fasting on Sunday, then you could say the fasting on Sunday would be for Sunday itself, because most of the Beis Hamikdash burned on Sunday. And the inference of that tshuva would suggest the possibility that the child that is born on Yud B'Av in a year where the fast takes place on Yom Rishon because Tes B'Av is on Shabbos, that the child would actually be chayiv to fast on Yud B'Av, because once we're fasting on Yud B'Av for the sake not just of making up Tes B'Av, but Yud B'Av was the day that most of the Beis Hamikdash was burnt, so therefore you're fasting for Yud because of Yud itself, and in that case, this child will be obligated to fast on Yud B'Av. And he can't say, well, I wasn't bar mitzvah on Tes B'Av, so I don't have to fast on Yud B'Av. Any kid whose bar mitzvah is on Tisha B'Av should have his bar mitzvah pshetel. If it's Tisha B'Av that falls out on Shabbos, this will be a good topic for a bar mitzvah pshetel. Is the kid chayiv in fasting that day or not?
According to this, there should be any difference between Tisha B'Av Nidche regarding Neuberger's Menekes, Rishonim or Mechalek. Right. So the question is, how far do you take this? Another difference is also for those that keep. There are different chumras that happen, what we call Shvua Shechal by Tisha B'Av. When Tisha B'Av comes out on a Sunday, if you're going to say that you're fasting on Sunday for Sunday itself, because it's the day where most of the Beis Hamikdash was burnt, so according to that, you wouldn't have a Shvur Shechal by Tisha B'Av that year, because normally you would say, well, if Tisha B'Av's Chal on Shabbos, so then I'm just using Sunday as a payback to Shabbos, but Tisha B'Av was really Chal on Shabbos, so that whole week would be Shvur Shechal by Tisha B'Av. But if you would say that once you're fasting on Yud B'Av, you're fasting on Yud B'Av for the sake of Yud, so then you can make an argument that you wouldn't have Shvur Shechal by Tisha B'Av at all that year, right? Which for Sfardim would be a big nafkamina, because by Ashkenazim they treat the 9 days in Shvur Shechal almost identical. If I'm not mistaken, is that right? That by Sfardim, Shvur Shechal by Tisha B'Av is much more chomer than what we would call the 9 days. Is that correct?
Yeah, aside from Baghdadi's.
Huh?
The Venice guy is very much.
Oh, he's machmer, but there are among Sfardim that are not, right? Isn't that true? What? Like the Shulchan Aruch is machmer. Now, there's a historic question which I don't know how to deal with. But when the Gemara tells us that most of the Beis Hamikdash burnt on Yud, what happened by Bayis Sheni? Was it the identical thing that most of the Beis Hamikdash was on Yud, or was it different? So I have 3 places, but I have a Tosfos different in this. 3 places of Achronim that claim that most of the Beis Hamikdash did not get burnt on the second Beis Hamikdash, only by the first Beis Hamikdash. This is an Or Sameach in Perek Hey of Tinius, a Yeshuas Yankiv in Hilchos Tisha B'Av, the Simon I don't remember offhand, and a Gvuras Ari in Tinius Chaf Hey that also claims that most of the Beis Hamikdash and Bayis Sheni burned on Tes, which is an interesting question, and I'll show you how it's Negeah. I have a Tosfos that clearly assumes differently, because when the Gemara discusses in Masechtas Megillah that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the Gemara wanted to make that there shouldn't be Tisha B'Av anymore, and the Gemara says there's only Tisha B'Av Shechal Liyos b'Shabbos. And on Tisha B'Av, when it's Chal on Shabbos, that's when Rebbe wanted they thought to be Makar Tisha B'Av, and that the Gemara explains, no, he never wanted to make it that Tisha B'Av, even when it comes out on Shabbos, should not have to fast. What he did want to make it is that you shouldn't make it as chamor, as stringent as regular Tisha B'Av. So Tosfos asks the question and says, Heichi salkadaitach the haitana the Rebbe hayiraitza laka Tisha B'Av l'gamri. It's impossible. He couldn't have wanted not to. How could anybody even thought such a thing, right? Ha'amrina kol oicha b'sheis b'Tisha B'Av ein reis min hachamas shel Yerushalayim. V'oidein bezin yachal b'achlev bezin chaveiroi. V'yesh loymar zok Tosfos l'rotza la'akroi. No one thought he wanted to makar Tisha B'Av ela michumra sheyesh b'mishar tainiyos. That when Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, he wants to be makar from the chumra that has over the tainiyos. So I wanted to suggest that according to these achronim, the shot in the first teretz would be, why did Rebbe want to be makar from the chumras? Because if Tisha B'Av is chomer because it's a day that happened in both Batei Migdash, right? But if we're celebrating Yud for the sake of Yud, and most of the Beis Hamikdash didn't burn on Tes, on Yud, the second Beis Hamikdash, so it's not Yom Shechpul Botzaros. But in Tosfos' second teretz, Tosfos shows that's not the case. They can't say that. Inami yeshlam the rotzel la'akre mitshiv l'kvoi basiri kedam Reb Yechanan ilu havoy hosam kivate basiri. So Tosfos says what they thought Rebbe wanted to do was to say b'kevei Tisha B'Av on Yud. So the Vilna Gaon says in Shulchan Aruch that that's what Rabbeinu HaKadosh wanted to do aliba de emes, even after their mistake. Their mistake was they thought Rebbe didn't want there should be Tisha B'Av when it comes out on Shabbos. No. He wanted that Tisha B'Av, when it comes out on Sunday, should not be as Chomer. And on that, right? And if Fakir, it should, Fakir. He wanted, I'm sorry, he said, the Ratzal Akrim and Shila Kval Basiri. He wanted that Tisha B'Av should always be on Sunday. Now, the only reason why he could want Tisha B'Av should be on Sunday is only if what happened in the Bayis Rishon happened in Bayis Sheni also. But if most of the Beis Hamikdash burned in the Bayis Sheni on Tess, then why would Rabbeinu HaKadosh have wanted to make Tisha B'Av permanently on Yud? Doesn't make any sense, unless exactly what happened in the first Beis Hamikdash happened in the second Beis Hamikdash. So I don't know how to understand this historically, but it sounds like that Tosfos's thinking is that in Bayis Sheni it must have also been that most of the Beis Hamikdash burnt on Sheni. I don't know how to deal with this question, but I'm just pointing out that it seems to me from this Tosfos it seems that that's the case. Now, there's an interesting thing here, which if indeed the Beis Hamikdash burned, the second Beis Hamikdash burned mostly on Tess, I'll show you a very interesting thing. The Gemara that we just referred to, it said, Rabbi Yochanan said, if I would have been around at the time of the Takana of Tisha B'Av, I would have made it on Yud. Why? Because most of the Beis Hamikdash burned on Yud. So the Maharsha has a problem over here, because the Gemara says on this, the Gemara says, it says by the Egel, Vatisa kol ha'eda v'yitnu es kolam v'yivku ha'am b'layla hu, that when the Meraglim came back and they said that Eretz Yisrael is not conquerable, right? When the Meraglim came back and said Eretz Yisrael was not conquerable, they came back and complained on Tisha B'Av. And Rabbi Yochanan is the one that said that Atem Bechisem Oisayim, there's two gerses, either Erev Tisha B'Av or Tisha B'Av Haya. Amrohem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Atem Bechisem Bechia Shel Chinam, you cried a Bechia of nothingness at the time of the Meraglim, because of course we could conquer Eretz Yisrael. V'ani kevei lechem Bechia L'Deiros, and I'm going to make a Bechia L'Deiros on Tisha B'Av. And who's the Man Yomra that says this? Rabbi Yochanan. So now the question is, Fakta Maharsha, how could Rabbi Yochanan be the one to say that because they cried on Tisha B'Av, by the Egel, therefore there's going to be a permanent Tisha B'Av? If Rabbi Yochanan himself is the one that says that Tisha B'Av should be on Yud. This is the Maharsha's question. So if I want to suggest the following idea, that if we go with the thought of these Achrayim, that most of the Beis Hamikdash by Bayis Sheni burnt on Tess, so that Rabbi Yochanan was only saying, if I was around between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, then I would have made Tisha B'Av on Yud B'Av, because that's when most of the Beis Hamikdash was burnt. But if most of the Beis Hamikdash burnt on Tes B'Av in the second Beis Hamikdash, and the main reason why we celebrate Tisha B'Av today is not mainly because of Bayis Rishon, because Bayis Rishon was rebuilt. Even though when Bayis Rishon was rebuilt, it wasn't rebuilt with the same grandeur of Bayis Sheni, of Bayis Rishon. Bayis Sheni didn't have the same thing. 5 things were missing, the Chazal tell us, right? But if Rabbi Yochanan said, Atem bechisim bechia shochinam, so the bechia l'doiros would be on Tesbav anyhow. Why? Because once most of the Beis HaMikdash burnt in the second bias on Tes, so the bechia l'doiros, the crying for generations, even Rabbi Yochanan would agree would be on Tes. So therefore it's not a stira. But I think Taisus is telling me not to say this pshat, because Taisus is telling me that Rabbeinu HaKadosh wanted to make Tisha B'Av l'doiros on Yud. That would only make sense if it was exactly what happened. The psukim were all by Bayis Rishon. The question is what happened by Bayis Sheni. If it was an exact replication, so why would Rabbeinu HaKadosh want to make it always, and then he would make it exactly in Yud, because by both Batei Mikdash, it was on Yud. But if, I don't know, I'm not a historian, I'm just saying what these Achrayim suggest, right? If you say this, so then I have a Geshmak Teretz to the Marshal's Kasha, because the Bechia L'Dairis, right? So the truth is, it depends on the Girsa of the Gemara, because Tais says in Girsa, the Gemara says, Oisa Yom, there's either a Girsa of Erev Tisha B'Av Haya, or Oisa Yom Tisha B'Av Haya. If it was Tisha B'Av, when the Meragim complained, and the crying was on the night of the 10th, so then Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't have a problem with his 2 different statements. Why? Because the crying took place at the night of Yud. But if the complaint was on Erev Tisha B'Av, depending on the Girsa, and then they cried on the night of Tisha B'Av, then you have a problem. The Marshal's problem is a good problem. How can Rabbi Yochanan say that you're going to have Tisha B'Av L'Dairos on Tes, if in fact Rabbi Yochanan holds Tisha B'Av should be on Yud? Good question.
But if you have the other Girsa, will be the Maskana of the Gemara is going to be a problem. How it's the Doris?
Right. Why is L'Dairos? Right. Unless you say that, in other words, that we give it both strengths. But I think it's a fair. But if you would say this other way, that really most of it burned then, right?
For what it's worth, Barrel Wine says that it was also Rugo V'Asiri, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I you know, I think he may be right from Taisus, because if Taisus is suggesting, that this happened, that Rebbe wanted to make Tisha B'Av on Yud, it would only make sense if that's what happened in Bayis Sheni too.
Also, it becomes very theoretically interesting, because if Rabbi Yochanan is saying that only based on what was going on Bayis Rishon, and they were not fasting in the duration of the 420 years, then it's a very modern mizach that he would say, if I was there, when the whole thing was nisbah.
Right. Well, there's a whole question during the 420 years, did they fast?
Right. I was saying, if he Neman like that was a very very abstract.
Right. In other words, but his lashon was El Molya Yisi Ba'isa Hadar. Right. It means for during the 70 years between the 2 Churbanos.
Or maybe it was the takana later on. If it was nisbatel, there was
right.
Night.
That's unclear. Right. But I picked a shear that I thought would even the Rav would find interesting. Correct? I believe there is a tshuva from the Ksav Sefer that discusses this bar mitzvah shiloh, which is an interesting question. How would you paskin l'maisa if a kid came to you that was born that day on Yud B'Av? Would you tell him he's chayav to fast? I got the rabbi to think about it. Pretty good, huh? Good child, no? What?
I mean, Pashtus, you see from the Ritba that it's the Nidchan on Sundays is Bechlal not the same, and Mubaris are actually patur from it.
Right.
Pashtus is that that's not.
That is a tashlumin. Right. Right. So then it would come out
Also,
that if the Mubaris does not have to fast, you would also tell this kid that he doesn't have to fast either because on Tisha B'Av he was a cotton.
Right. Also,
Right?
the whole Or Sameach is very interesting also because we're not doing it a full tightness of Me'erev al Erev because it's not Yamim Rahim. When it was Nidkan as a tiny Sibur, Pashtus they were doing like a full tightness.
Right.
So the whole Or Sameach, it will fall out like that.
Right.
Because his whole thing is, the Rashba that says the Oraisa is only if it's not full day.
Of fasting on
Right.
Shabbos.
So that Or Sameach is very, that's Or Sameach, right?
Yeah.
That's very Mechadish. Also because when it was Nidkan, it was...
But he's trying to explain the inherent difficulty that you would have. How could Avraham possibly hold that you could fast on Shabbos for Asar B'Tevis, but not for Tisha B'Av?
Right. But
That's a vexing problem.
correct. But
Right.
Asar B'Tevis was from Erev at Erev when it was Nidkan.
Right.
Like the Emes at Tani Sibur, so
Right.
you don't have the Or Sameach.
Right. But he's going. I assume that it wasn't the case. Asar B'Tevis, that Avraham was talking about Asar B'Tevis as not being such a situation. In other words, he has a vexing problem. Like, the Beis Yosef just brings it and says we're not knowing that way. It's not Negeya, but how could it even be that you fast on Asar B'Tevis on Shabbos and you don't fast on Tisha B'Av? Asar B'Tevis is more chomer than Tisha B'Av? It's not. So it's a very interesting approach to explain, that difficult.
The Pashtus would be because you have a Gazas HaKasev.
Right.
Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh.
Right.
That makes it.
But you still have to understand the Gzeres HaKosev itself, of why was there Gzeres HaKosev to say fast on Asar B'Teves, but when on Tisha B'Av you don't fast, right? It's still a strange thing,
Yeah.
right?
But certainly, the Ram doesn't say that Kal Vachomer to Tisha B'Av. So it's however we understand the Gazas HaKasev, he's understanding that this was a Gazas HaKasev.
Right. So, but he's trying to make sense of this Gzeres HaKosev and saying it's not because Asar B'Teves was more chomer than Tisha B'Av, right? Which is a logical thing to assume, because there are no Mekairis that Asar B'Teves, even if I'm right that the Aschalta de Pranus Adifa is the underlying svara of the Gzeres HaKosev, right? But still, it wouldn't make sense that Tisha B'Av should be, you don't fast on Shabbos, and Asar B'Teves you do? Like, how could that be? Right? So the Or Sameach is coming up with, I think, a genius way to explain the shita of the Avraham. No? Otherwise, it's a wonder. Like, how could Avraham say that Asar B'Tevis is more chomer, right? How could it be? So Gzeres HaKosev says it's more chomer than Tisha B'Av. There's nothing in halacha that indicates that. There's no dinim on Asar B'Tevis that are more chomer than Shavasar B'Tammuz and Tzom Gedalia, for instance, right? In halacha, we don't find that. But Shabbos, yeah, and Tisha B'Av not? That's a pella, correct? Huh? So, what? Right, so, and that, the Or Sameach, I thought it was, very, very genius.
But does it make sense to say that the Miraculum came back on Tisha B'Av, and the night that they cried was the tail?
Yes, there is, according to one Gersa in the Gemara, that's exactly what happened.
Targum Yerushalmi says they left, it was 29th of Sivan.
Yeah.
So 40 days after would be the 10th of Av. if you say that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. In other words, if that's what it is, so then, but Rabbi Yochanan is then saying an interesting thing. Ata b'chis b'chia, shochim ata b'chia l'deiros. But the b'chia l'deiros was not on Yud. It wasn't the mice on Yud because they didn't fast on Yud.
According to Guy, also becomes a very modern thing because according to the way he understands Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yochanan is really Machlokes Tanaim. It's his Rebbe's.
Right.
Shita is not Ilmole HaYisisha.
Right.
It
Right.
really becomes a Machlokes Tanaim.
Right. Well, there is a Gilyon in the Taisus that deals with the how could it be? How do you answer up the question of Ein Bezin Yochel Batel Divrei Bezin Chaveroi, right? If the later Bezin wasn't as Chomer, and these new Gemaras, I don't know exactly where the Gilyon Taisus is. 1 second. Lamed. Got to find my way around over here. These newfangled things. There is a Gilyon of Taisus that talks about that if there was a many people that held one way and the Roiv held the other way, if it was a Das Yochid, that's one thing, but if there was many people, let's say it was a 60-40 to make Tisha B'Av on Tess instead of Yud. So if there was many people at the first Bezdin that made it on Tess, but there was a big number that made it on Yud, then for Rabbi Yochanan to make it on Yud wouldn't be a violation of Ein Bezdin Yochel Levatel because there were many that held that way, based on the Mishnah in Idias. Hold on, let me see if I can hear it. Is Vadei Rabbi Yochanan hayochel achriya koach chacham l'daitei el shaharbi chachamim hiskimu l'kvaya basiri rak haroi v'skimu l'kvaya b'chi uki agavna eina b'chlal ein bezin yochel levatel diyesh v'shutz biad bezin acher l'kvaya halacha kedivrei yochid kediyisa be'idiyis perkal Mishnah Batka. In other words, that if there was let's say at the time of the original takana, if there was a 60-40 or 55-45 vote by the Bezdin HaGadol to make it on Tess, so then when if Rabbi Yochanan came along and said, no, I want it to be on Yud, generations later, he wasn't like, oh, it was 95% that say it should be on Tess, and he's coming along and saying it should be on Yud. It was a close call at that time. So then, therefore, it wouldn't be a problem of Ein Bezdin Yochel Levatel, which is the Chiddush. Huh? Right. And who says numbers make a difference? But that's how they're trying to answer up, because otherwise.
He supposes that Acharabim is not a psak, is a hanhaga.
Right. It must have been something different, because otherwise, if Taisus is right, if Rabbeinu HaKadosh wanted to do it like Rabbi Yochanan, right? I mean, how could he want to do it like Rabbi Yochanan if, when it was nikva earlier, it was nikva for Tess? Unless the pshat is that there was, it was a hot button topic of where a lot taka held they should do it on Yud, right? Which is an interesting concept, but you have to deal with the fact that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, right, according to this Teres and Taisus, wanted to make Tisha B'Av permanently on Yud. They didn't go along with it, but you see that it was not a simple matter, right? You see, it wasn't a simple matter. So it must have been that it wasn't and we just look at the Lamaisa. The Lamaisa was Tes B'Av was the Tainus, but it was a big tumult of where Rabbi Yochanan's position was recognized as oh, he's from it was a close call. That's what it sounds like, which is an interesting chiddush. I have to leave you, I just want to leave you with a thought that I want to give a different perspective to Tisha B'Av that perhaps would help us think about it differently than the way we do. I certainly don't feel, the loss of the Beis Hamikdash the way we should, and I think many of us can feel that sensitivity or lack of sensitivity because we're not that unhappy with our lives and realize, of course, if we think about it and really be connected to know the difference between having a Beis Hamikdash and not is beyond description. But I want to give a different outlook to it that maybe can help us mourn the lack of Beis Hamikdash in a deeper way. The Vilna Gaon writes in Mishlei, in Perek Tes Zayin, Kapitel Tes Zayin Pasuk Daled, he writes that at the time there were Nevi'im, every person went to the Navi, and the Navi told him, your goal in life, your particular mitzvahs that you should be mahader in, your derech hachaim should be this, this, and this. And we look at Nevi'im as only people that told the whole klal, Hashem's not happy with you. But we don't look at Nevi'im as giving individual advice to each and every person. Somebody goes to a big tzaddik today and says, tell me what my top in life is. Okay, but whoever you would go to, you can go to the Vilna Gaon, you can go to anybody you want. I'm talking about the biggest people, of course they can know more than we could, but a Navi would connect with Hashem and say, Ruvain ben Shimon, your Iker mitzvah has to be Shluch HaKain. Your Iker Masechta has to be kindness. Your Iker mitzvah has to be Chesed. Right? He said that each and every Yochid will be given an exact, detailed description from Shamayim as to his Tafkid HaChaim. And then he brings a ton of Elio that says, so what do we do today that we don't have Nevi'im telling us what to do? So he brings a ton of Elio that says that if you daven to Hashem to direct you to know what to put your keiches in, Ruach HaKodesh yesh l'chol echad ve'echad, and a person can be zeicha to find his niche in life as well. But at the time during Nevi'im, the way a person found his niche in life was he went to the Navi and the Navi said, okay, this is your tafkid. I just heard from the Shemayim. So imagine the clarity of life that people would have, that we would have, to know that from Shemayim we were told that this is what I have to work on, this is my tafkid. Right? I keep all the mitzvahs, but my main things is to work on my particular avodah with my midas, particular avodah and mitzvahs would be whatever the Navi came down. And he says, and shame parts of fame Damon Zelazeh, just like two people don't look alike, Kachein Day same and call Echad v'Echad, each and every person has a tafkid b'yochid. And that's what a Navi could have told us. So we can look at not having the VM in that way and realize we'd have much more direction in life. And the other idea to take out of this is to understand that each and every one of us is not a duplication of anybody else. And each and every one of us has a tafkid, yuchid, something special that each and every one of us should excel in and be special in. And we should daven to Hashem that we should come to that understanding and be directed to know what's the best avodah for us and to be zeicher to get that. If we had Nevi'im again, then we would have so much more clarity in life as to our tafkid. We wouldn't be living in doubt, is this what I should be doing, this I should be doing, the Navi would say, David ben Shmuel, this is your tafkid, direct from heaven, right? That would make life, I would know exactly what my mission should be. I wouldn't be questioning myself, should I be working in this, should I be working in this? Life is confusing, right? And the balance of how to do mitzvahs, the moral rights, and Hagdama Shniya, Ketzeres Yisrael, that even when you're working on one mitzvah, another mitzvah can suffer. It's hard to do everything right. But if you know what your unique tafkid is, and that's what they had at the time of Nevi'im, then life was easier in many, many ways. Although we should be zeichel to come to that and have Nevi'im guide us. It means the biggest tzaddikim couldn't tell you the same thing that a Navi could tell you. Because the Navi is telling you, your neshama was brought down to earth to work on another. Your neshama was brought down to earth to work on chesed. Your neshama was brought down to earth to work on kiruv. Everyone was brought down for different reasons. But to keep in mind that we also know that each one of us is important, vital, and necessary for the world's tikkun. So don't look at yourself as just a private citizen doing your own thing, but look at yourself as Im ein ani li mili. I'm here for a tafkid miyuchid, and I need the guidance from Shemayim to know what my goal in life is, right? And it'll make each and every one of us a better father, husband, member of the community, to know this is my tafkid. And this is what people had when they were in Nevi'im, and now we're in a fog trying our best, but it's not the same thing as knowing it straight from Shemayim. Have a meaningful and easy fast, and Hatzlacha Rambam.